Everyone was ready for takeoff on the plane when the little girl said, "Stop! Do not board this plane." The tarmac smelled like jet fuel and hot concrete, the way it always does in summer, the way that smell gets into your clothes and stays there for days. Flight 2247 to Miami sat gleaming on the runway of Aerovia Gate 14, engines humming their low, patient hum, the sound of a machine that is ready, that has always been ready, that does not understand delay. 183 passengers had already cleared security, collected their boarding passes, argued over overhead bin space, eaten overpriced airport sandwiches. 183 people had already decided, in the quiet and invisible way that people decide things, that today was just another day, that nothing unusual would happen, that the flight would be routine. They were wrong. The girl was standing on the tarmac when the pilots descended the boarding stairs. She was maybe 9 years old, maybe 10, the kind of age where it's hard to tell, where children are caught between being small and being almost something else. She wore a yellow hoodie with a smear of something dark across the left side, old jeans that were 2 inches too short, beat-up sneakers that had once been white. A small brown backpack hung off her shoulders, the kind that kids carry to school. Her hair was in a single braid, slightly loose, a few strands crossing her face in the wind that came off the runway. She should not have been there. That was the first thing Captain Arnold Vance noticed as he descended the last 2 steps of the boarding stairs. Luggage case in hand, co-pilot David Reyes just behind him. She should absolutely not have been there. Not on the active tarmac, not without an escort, not without a badge, not without any of the dozen things that standing in that particular spot at that particular moment required. A ground crew worker in a yellow vest was jogging toward her from the left, and 2 airport security officers were converging from the right, their radios already crackling. But the girl was not looking at any of them. She was looking at Captain Vance. And her arm was extended, one small hand, one finger pointing, not at him, but past him, at the plane, at the engine, at the left engine, specifically the one closest to the terminal, the one that had been serviced 3 days ago, according to the maintenance log that Vance had signed off on himself that morning. "Stop," she said, not loudly. She didn't yell it, didn't scream it. She said it the way someone says a word they have practiced, the way you say something when you know it needs to be said, but you are afraid of how it will sound. Clear and quiet and very, very certain. "Stop. Do not board this plane." Captain Vance stopped walking. It was not a conscious decision. His body stopped before his mind gave the order, responding to something in the girl's voice that was not ordinary, not hysteria, not childish drama, something that was very nearly the opposite of drama, a complete, stripped-down, terrifying calm. "Sweetheart," he said carefully, "you can't be out here. This area—" "The engine," she said. "Something is wrong with the engine." The security officers reached her then, one on each side, and the ground crew worker was close behind. "Miss, you need to come with us," one of the officers said, reaching for her shoulder. She did not move. She kept her finger pointing at the engine, and her eyes stayed on Vance. "I know it sounds crazy," she said. "I know you don't know me. But please, something is wrong with that engine, and I can prove it, and if you don't listen to me, then 180 people are going to die today." The ground crew worker and both security officers stopped, not because of what she said exactly, but because of how she said it, because of the extraordinary, unnerving absence of anything that sounds like exaggeration, because a 9-year-old girl on a tarmac in a dirty yellow hoodie was looking at a senior airline captain with an expression that pilots learned to recognize in each other after years in the cockpit, the expression of someone who has checked their instruments twice and does not like what they are reading. Captain Arnold Vance had been flying commercial aircraft for 31 years. He had logged over 20,000 hours. He had flown through weather that made younger pilots reach for their sick bags. He had been the calmest person in rooms full of panicking people on more occasions than he could count. He was not a man who frightened easily. He was not a man who frightened, period. He set his luggage case down on the tarmac. "What's your name?" he asked. The officers looked at each other. "Maya," the girl said. "Maya, how old are you?" 9, almost 10. A pause. "That doesn't matter." "No," he said slowly. "I suppose it doesn't. What do you see, Maya? What do you think is wrong with my engine?" And that was the moment. That was the moment that everything turned on. Not the dramatic movie version moment, not a moment with music and slow motion and gasps from a crowd. Just a man on a hot tarmac in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, bending slightly to look at a child who should not have been there, asking her what she saw. Maya Osi had not slept in 2 days. She had not eaten a real meal in longer than that, though she would not have been able to tell you exactly how long, because keeping track of time had not been possible lately. Keeping track of time required a kind of stability that she did not have, had not had for a while now. Her mother, Diane Osei, had been a ground crew mechanic at Aerovia for 6 years. Not a glamorous job, not a highly paid job, but a real one, a job she had trained hard for, a job that she was genuinely good at. A job that let her pay the rent on their small apartment 3 blocks from the airport and keep the lights on and put food on the table most of the time. Maya had grown up in the world of planes the way some kids grow up in the world of music or sports. Not as passengers, but as intimates. She knew the names of engine components before she knew long division. She could identify aircraft by silhouette at the age of 6. She had spent countless afternoons in the break room of Hangar 7 while her mother worked, doing homework on the plastic table, eating vending machine crackers, absorbing everything around her the way children absorb everything they are surrounded by, completely and permanently. Her mother had taught her things, not just the names, the meanings, the way a healthy engine sounds versus the way a troubled one sounds, the way metal looks when it has been stressed correctly versus when something is wrong in the interior, in the places you cannot see from the outside unless you know what you are looking for. Her mother had a gift for explaining complicated mechanical things simply, and Maya had a gift for understanding and remembering what she was told. 2 weeks ago, Diane Osei had been suspended. Not fired, suspended, pending investigation, for something that Maya did not fully understand, except that it involved a report her mother had filed about a maintenance discrepancy on a particular fleet of Aerovia aircraft, and that the report had been disputed by her supervisor, a man named Roland Cruz, who had worked at Aerovia for 20 years, and who had twice the institutional authority that Diane had. Her mother had written the report because she believed something was genuinely wrong. She had been told she was mistaken. She had filed the report anyway, and 4 days later she had been placed on unpaid suspension pending an investigation that she had been told would likely result in her termination. The week after that, Diane Osei had sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of her and cried for a long time, in the silent way that adults cry when they are trying not to let their children hear them. Maya had heard. Maya had been in her bedroom with her door closed and her light off, lying on her bed in the dark, listening to her mother cry, and she had felt something settle in her chest like a stone, cold and heavy and utterly immovable. The maintenance discrepancy her mother had reported was a hairline crack in the housing of the left compressor fan assembly on 3 specific aircraft in the Aerovia fleet. Aircraft that had been in service for longer than the recommended interval, without the specific inspection protocol that Diane believed was required. Her mother had documented everything: photographs, serial numbers, maintenance log timestamps, a written technical analysis that had taken her 3 evenings to complete. Her supervisor had dismissed it. The investigation had been closed internally. One of those three aircraft was Flight 2247. Maya knew this because she had read her mother's report. She had read it the night her mother left it open on the kitchen table and went to bed early with a headache. And she had read it with the careful, complete attention of a child who has been taught to understand what she is reading. She had recognized the aircraft registration number from visits to the hangar. She had cross-referenced it, quietly, methodically, in the way that her mother had taught her to verify technical information, against the publicly available flight schedule on the airline's website. Flight 2247, Gate 14, 10:45 departure. She had thought about it for a week. She had turned it over and over in her mind. The way you turn over a decision that you know is right but that frightens you. The way you circle something because circling it is easier than going straight at it. She had thought, someone else will know. Someone else will catch it. The system will catch it. There are checks, there are protocols. There are procedures. Things like this do not slip through. And then she had thought about her mother crying in the kitchen, and about the report that had been dismissed, and about the fact that the system had already had its chance to catch it, and had chosen not to. She had walked to the airport at 6 in the morning, alone, while her mother was still asleep. She had not left a note because she did not know how to write what she needed to say. She had used the side access point behind Hangar 7 that she had known about since she was 7 years old, the one with the broken latch that never got fixed because the ground crew used it as a shortcut. She had walked out onto the tarmac in the morning light, and she had waited. She had been waiting for 3 hours when the pilots came down the stairs. Captain Vance listened to all of this. He stood on the tarmac with the sun beating down on his shoulders and his co-pilot beside him, and 2 security officers and a ground crew worker standing in a loose circle, and he listened to a 9-year-old girl explain, in precise and measured technical language that had no business being in the mouth of a 9-year-old, what she believed was wrong with his aircraft and why she believed it. He asked her questions. She answered them without hesitation. He used terminology, specific, non-obvious terminology, the kind of language you learn from years of mechanical training. And she answered in the same language, fluently, the way someone answers in their native tongue. Co-pilot David Reyes had gone very quiet. He was 34 years old, 12 years of flying, and he was looking at the girl with an expression that was very different from the skeptical look he had worn when she first spoke. He was looking at her the way you look at something that does not fit your model of the world, something that insists on existing anyway. "The photographs," Vance said. "Your mother's report. Where is it?" "At home," Maya said. "But I can tell you the registration numbers." She told him the registration numbers. All 3 aircraft. He wrote them in his phone. There was a long silence. The boarding music inside the terminal was still playing. Through the glass, Vance could see the gate agent beginning to call boarding groups, could see the line forming, 183 people picking up their bags and shuffling forward toward a plane that was ready and humming and pointed at the sky. "David," Vance said quietly. "Yeah," Reyes said. "Get maintenance on the phone." "Already dialing." The girl did not move. She stood on the tarmac with her finger still pointing at the engine, and she watched Captain Vance take out his radio, and she watched him press the call button, and she heard him say, in a voice that was absolutely steady and absolutely certain, the words that would change everything that happened in the next 4 hours. "This is Captain Vance. I need a full inspection hold on Flight 2247. Stand by ground crew to the left engine, now." The hold took 11 minutes to be officially called. In those 11 minutes, the gate agent stopped calling boarding groups. The passengers in line looked at each other and asked the questions that passengers always ask when something unexpected happens. Is it weather? Is it mechanical? How long will the delay be? The woman at the gate desk smiled the practiced smile of someone who is managing information carefully and said that there was a brief technical review and that updates would follow shortly. Maya sat on the tarmac steps that led to the maintenance access door. Someone had brought her a bottle of water. One of the ground crew, a big man named Pete, who had worked with her mother for 4 years and who had looked at her for a long moment before opening his own cooler and handing it to her without a word. She drank it and held the empty bottle in both hands and watched the maintenance team arrive. There were 4 of them. They brought equipment. They worked on the left engine for 22 minutes, and Maya watched every minute of it. And she did not let herself think about what would happen if she was wrong. What it would mean if her mother's report had been a mistake. What it would mean if she had delayed a flight and frightened 180 people and broken onto a restricted tarmac for nothing. She did not let herself think about it, because thinking about it required believing that her mother was wrong. And her mother was not wrong. The lead maintenance technician, a woman in her 50s named Sandra Kwan, was the one who found it. She found it in the exact location that Diane Osie's report had specified, in the exact type of stress fracture that the report had described. It was not visible from the exterior at casual inspection. It required the specific probing tool and the specific angle and the specific knowledge of where to look that Diane had outlined in her documentation. Sandra Kwan found it in 14 minutes, confirmed it in 4 more, and came out from under the engine with an expression on her face that Maya recognized immediately, because it was the expression her mother wore when something she had found turned out to be real. Sandra Kwan walked directly to Captain Vance. "She's right," Sandra said. Vance looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Maya, who was still sitting on the steps holding the empty water bottle. "How extensive?" he asked. "Extensive enough that this aircraft does not fly today, possibly not this week. I want 3 other sets of eyes on it before we make a call, but my initial read is, she's right. This is exactly what the kid said it was." The silence that followed was not like the silence before. It was heavier. It had weight and texture and the specific quality of a silence in which people are counting backward from a catastrophe that did not happen. Captain Vance walked over to Maya. He sat down on the steps beside her, which was not a thing that captains in uniform typically did on active tarmacs. But he did it anyway, because some moments do not care about typical. "Your mother filed a report," he said. "Yes." "And they suspended her." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. The maintenance team was still working on the engine. In the terminal, the gate agent was making an announcement that Flight 2247 had been indefinitely delayed. And the sound of that announcement, muffled through the glass, turned into something small and manageable by distance, was carrying over the tarmac in pieces. "How did you get out here?" he asked. "The side door behind Hangar 7, Maya said. "The latch is broken." "I know that latch," he said. "It's been broken for about 4 years. 5, Maya said. "My mum used to use it as a shortcut." He looked at her. "You walked from home? It's only 12 blocks. In the morning. I left at 6, she said. "I didn't want to miss you." He was quiet again. Then, "You knew you might be wrong." It was not a question. She answered it anyway. "I knew my mom wasn't wrong," she said. "She's never wrong about this stuff. She's the best mechanic at this airline, and everyone knows it, except the people who make the decisions." She paused. "I was scared I wasn't explaining it right. I don't have the same training she has. I was scared you wouldn't understand what I was saying." "I understood," Vance said. "I know," said Maya. "That's why I stayed." The next several hours were not the clean, triumphant kind that stories sometimes describe, where a wrong is discovered and immediately set right, where the machinery of justice moves swiftly and with clarity. The real hours were messier than that. There were phone calls and meetings and carefully worded statements and a great deal of institutional caution about how the information would be handled and who would make which announcements. These things take time because institutions move slowly when moving quickly would require acknowledging that something went badly wrong. But some things happened that afternoon. A second maintenance team verified Sandra Kwan's findings. The other two aircraft from Diane Osei's original report were grounded for inspection, and both showed similar stress fractures at varying stages of development. A formal review of the maintenance report that had been dismissed was ordered, not by the airline's internal oversight board, but by the Federal Aviation Authority, which had been notified by Captain Vance himself, who had placed a direct call from the tarmac while the maintenance team was still working. And Maya's mother was called. That was the call that Vance made first, before any of the others, standing at the bottom of the boarding stairs with the phone pressed to his ear. He had looked up Diane Osei in the crew directory through Sandra Kwan, who had worked with her and who had, it turned out, read her report and believed it at the time and had not been in a position to say so. Diane picked up on the second ring. "Ms. Osei," Vance said, "my name is Captain Arnold Vance. I have your daughter here at the airport. She is safe, and I need to tell you that your maintenance report was correct." There was silence on the other end of the call. Then a sound that was not words, not language, just sound. The sound of something releasing that has been held very tight for a very long time. Maya heard this. She was sitting close enough to Vance that she could hear the faint thread of her mother's voice through the phone. She did not know exactly what her mother said, but she knew the sound. She knew it the way you know the sounds of the person you love most in the world. You know them before they are words, before they are meanings, the way you know them in your body. She put her face in her hands and breathed. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry on the walk to the airport that morning, in the cold, early light, with the sound of the planes overhead and the taste of no breakfast in her mouth and 12 blocks still to go. She had promised herself, not until it is done, not until it is over. It was over. She cried. Pete, the ground crew worker who had given her the water, sat down on the other side of her without saying anything and handed her a second bottle. She took it. Diane Osei arrived at the airport 40 minutes later, still in the clothes she had slept in, her hair loose, her face the face of a woman who had spent 20 minutes driving faster than she should have. She came through the side door behind Hangar 7, the one with the broken latch, and she walked out onto the tarmac, and she saw her daughter sitting on the steps with the ground crew man beside her, and she stopped walking. Maya stood up. They met in the middle of the tarmac, between the boarding stairs and the maintenance equipment and the grounded aircraft in the afternoon sun, and Diane Osei wrapped her arms around her daughter and held her the way you hold something you are terrified you almost lost. And Maya pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Captain Vance stood a respectful distance away and watched, and David Reyes stood beside him, and Sandra Kwan stood on the other side, and all three of them watched the woman and the girl on the tarmac without speaking. It was Reyes who finally broke the silence, quietly, almost to himself. 12 blocks, he said, 6 in the morning, alone. Almost 10, Vance said. Reyes looked at him. She told me, Vance said. Almost 10. Like it mattered. The formal investigation took 4 months. Roland Cruz, Diane Osei's supervisor, was found to have dismissed the report without conducting the required technical review, a violation of both internal policy and federal aviation maintenance protocols. His dismissal from Aerovia was announced quietly, in the way that institutional failures are usually announced quietly, without ceremony and with careful language about operational restructuring. Diane Osei's suspension was overturned. Her back pay was restored. She was offered, and accepted after considering it for 2 weeks, a position as Senior Maintenance Inspector, a newly created role that came with the specific mandate of independently reviewing maintenance discrepancy reports before they could be administratively closed. The 2 other aircraft from her original report required significant repair before returning to service. The estimated passenger load on those 3 aircraft over the 4 weeks they would have continued flying, had the report continued to be ignored, was calculated at over 12,000 people. And 12,000 people who would have boarded those planes without knowing. Maya never thought about it that way. She did not think about the 12,000. She thought about the 183, and specifically about the way they had looked through the glass of the terminal window, the way they had been standing in line with their bags, shuffling forward, doing the thing that people do when they have decided that today is just another day. She thought about that sometimes, in the years that followed. She thought about the moment just before she spoke, standing on the tarmac in the hot sun, watching the captain come down the stairs, knowing that she was about to say something that would make her look ridiculous, that would bring security officers, that would make adults look at her with the particular impatient patience they reserve for children who are causing inconvenience. The moment before she opened her mouth and said the word that she had practiced, quietly, without drama, the way her mother had taught her to deliver a finding, not with alarm, but with certainty. Stop. She had been afraid of looking foolish. She had been far more afraid of staying silent. Her mother had gone back to work on a Monday in October, crisp morning, the airport busy with the particular energy of the start of the week. Maya had walked her to the gate, not to the aircraft, just to the fence line where the employee entrance was, and they had stood there for a moment in the morning light. "You know what I keep thinking about?" her mother said. "What?" "That latch." Diane smiled. "I never reported that broken latch. I used it as a shortcut for 5 years and never reported it." She looked at her daughter. "I should have reported it." "Maybe," Maya said, "but I'm glad you didn't." Diane looked at her for a moment. Then she laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that sounds like relief turned into sound. She hugged Maya, brief and tight, the way people hug when they do not have the words and do not need them. Then she went through the gate. Maya watched the door close behind her. She stood at the fence line in the October morning and looked out at the tarmac, at the aircraft lined up in the early light, at the ground crew moving between them in their yellow vests, at the sky above the runway that was pale blue and cloudless and enormous. She watched a plane lift off. She watched it climb, slowly at first, and then faster, nose angled up into the blue. She watched it until it was small, and then until it was a point, and then until the point was gone. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, a plane taking off. It happened hundreds of times a day at this airport, thousands of times a day in skies all over the world. People did not notice it. People did not think about it. People did not stand at fence lines and watch it the way Maya watched it. She noticed it. She thought about it. She watched the empty sky where the plane had been. And then she picked up her school backpack, the small brown one she had carried the day she walked to the airport at 6 in the morning. And she turned and walked home through the streets that smelled of autumn and jet fuel and ordinary Tuesday mornings. And she was thinking about everything and nothing, the way you think after something has ended and before the next thing has begun. She was almost 10 years old. She had the rest of her life ahead of her. She already knew with the quiet and complete certainty that she had learned from her mother what she wanted to do with it. The thing about growing up around aircraft is that you learn, very early, that machines do not lie. People lie. People file reports and have those reports dismissed. People decide for reasons of convenience or ego or institutional inertia that something is probably fine, that the risk is acceptable, that the protocol can wait until next time. But machines do not have those considerations. A machine fails according to physics, not politics. A crack propagates because of metal fatigue and stress load and time, and it does not care whether the report describing it was accepted or rejected. It does not care whether the person who found it kept her job or lost it. Diane Osei had taught Maya this early and often in the specific and patient way that good teachers teach things, not by lecturing, but by showing, by bringing Maya into the hangar on quiet Saturday mornings and walking her through the aircraft with a running commentary that turned mechanical inspection into something like storytelling. Here is the part that bears the weight. Here is how you can tell when something has been carrying more than it should. Here is the difference between where that is normal and where that is telling you something. Here is how you listen to a machine. Maya had listened. She had listened to everything her mother said, and she had stored it in the way that children store things they love, not as facts to be recalled, but as part of themselves, absorbed and integrated, available without effort, the way music you love is available, the way you can hear a song in your head just by thinking of its first note. The Saturday before the suspension, they had gone to the hangar together. Diane had not known it would be the last time for a while. Maya had not known either. They had walked along the row of aircraft in the early morning light, and Diane had pointed to the Aerovia aircraft, the one at the end, and said without particular emphasis, "The way you say something that is simply true. That one worries me. I've been logging it. Something is off." Maya had looked at the plane. She had looked at her mother. "What kind of off?" she had asked. "The kind you can't quite see yet," Diane said. "But it's there. You can feel it in the data if you've been watching long enough." That was the last Saturday before everything changed. Maya thought about it often in the weeks that followed, during the suspension, during the silence, during the evenings when her mother sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and papers spread out around her that no one at Aerovia would look at anymore. She thought about it the way you think about the last normal moment, the moment just before something becomes the moment just before. She thought about her mother saying, "You can feel it in the data if you've been watching long enough." And she thought, I have been watching my whole life. There was a woman on Flight 2247 named Carla Prentice, 41 years old, traveling alone, going home to Miami after a work conference she had stayed 2 extra days for because a colleague had gotten sick and she had covered their sessions. She'd been in line at Gate 14 when the delay announcement came, standing with her carry-on bag and her conference lanyard still around her neck because she had forgotten to take it off, reading emails on her phone with the automatic, half-present attention of someone who is already thinking about the next thing. She had looked up when the announcement came. She had registered it with mild, ordinary annoyance, the kind that passes in seconds, that is forgotten before the plane lands. She had gone to get coffee, because what else do you do when a flight is delayed? And she had come back and found a seat near the window that looked out over the tarmac. And she had sat there drinking her coffee and watching the ground crew move around the aircraft without seeing them, the way you look out windows in airports without seeing anything because you are in between, because airports are the spaces between places, and you are not really there. She had not known. Sitting in that chair with her conference lanyard and her coffee and her mild annoyance, that something had happened on the tarmac, that a child had stood in the sun and pointed, that a captain had listened. She had not known, and she would not know for some time. The airline did not make announcements explaining the nature of mechanical delays. The news coverage of what happened, when it came quietly. A technical story in an aviation industry publication, then a longer piece in a regional newspaper, then a short segment on a local news broadcast that most people in Miami scrolled past. Carla Prentice did not scroll past it. She was sitting in her apartment when she saw the segment. It was 3 weeks after the flight, 3 weeks after the delay that had given her mild, ordinary annoyance and made her miss a dinner reservation. She was watching the news with the same half-present attention she had been paying to everything that day. And then something reached through the half-presence and grabbed her completely. And she sat forward, and she turned up the volume, and she watched a brief clip of a woman and a girl on an airport tarmac. The girl in a yellow hoodie with a brown backpack, the woman holding her the way you hold something you almost lost. The segment was 40 seconds long. It did not explain the technical details of the maintenance finding. It did not name the supervisor who had dismissed the report. It said only that a 9-year-old girl had identified a critical engine fault on a commercial aircraft before departure, citing her mother's previously dismissed maintenance report, and that federal aviation investigators had confirmed the finding and grounded 3 aircraft for repairs. 40 seconds. Carla Prentice sat in her apartment for a long time after the segment ended. She thought about the window seat at Gate 14. She thought about her coffee and her lanyard and her mild annoyance. She thought about the tarmac she had been looking at without seeing. She thought about whatever had been happening on that tarmac, that small figure in the yellow hoodie, that arm extended, that single word, while she had been reading emails on her phone and thinking about the next thing. She thought, I did not know. I was right there and I did not know. And she thought, it did not matter that I did not know. It happened anyway. That was the thing that stayed with her. That the thing which saved her life, and the lives of 182 other people who had been standing in line with their bags and their annoyances and their half-present attention, had happened entirely without their knowledge or participation. It had been done for them by a child they did not know, acting on knowledge she had been given by a woman whose report had been dismissed, who had lost her job for telling the truth. Carla Prentice was not someone who wrote letters. She had not written a personal letter to anyone in years. But she sat down that evening and she wrote one. She wrote it to the airline, addressed to the maintenance department, and she asked them to please ensure it was forwarded to Diane Osei, Senior Maintenance Inspector. She wrote, I was on flight 2247. I did not know what happened on the tarmac that day. I know now. I want you to know that someone is grateful. Someone who was reading emails by the gate and thinking about the next thing, who had no idea what was happening outside the window. Someone whose name you will never need to know, but who knows yours now and will not forget it. Thank you for filing the report. Thank you for not accepting the dismissal. Thank you for raising a daughter who knew what the report said and what it meant and what to do with it when the moment came. The letter took her 40 minutes to write. She was not a natural writer, and she rewrote several sentences several times. When she was done, she read it over once and then folded it and put it in an envelope and addressed it and stamped it and put it on the corner of her kitchen counter to mail in the morning. She did not think of it as a significant act. She thought of it as a small and necessary one, the smallest possible acknowledgement she could make of something that was larger than she had words for. A way of saying, I see it. I know it happened. It mattered. Small acts are like that. They don't announce themselves. They happen on tarmacs, in the middle of ordinary Tuesdays, in yellow hoodies with dirty smears and backpacks that are meant for school. They happen in the form of a child's voice saying, stop. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that is heavier than volume. Diane Osei received the letter on a Thursday, 6 weeks after the events at Gate 14. She read it at her desk in the new office that came with the new title, a real office, with a window and a nameplate and a job description that finally matched what she had been doing for years. She read it twice, sitting with her coffee in the morning light. Then she picked up her phone and called Maya, who was in school, and left a voicemail. Hey, Bug, I got a letter today. I'll tell you about it tonight. I just wanted to call because... A pause. The kind of pause that happens when you are trying to find the words for something that doesn't quite fit into words. I just wanted to call. That's all. See you tonight. Maya listened to the voicemail at lunch, sitting at a table in the school cafeteria with her brown backpack on the bench beside her. She listened to it twice. The phone pressed to her ear, the noise of the cafeteria around her. The voices and the trays and the ordinary. Unnoticed sounds of 100 kids eating lunch on a Tuesday. She put the phone in her pocket. She ate her lunch. She thought about the plane lifting off above the airport fence line, the morning of the October light, the sky pale blue and enormous. She thought about it going up and then going small, and then going gone. She thought about all the planes she had watched take off in her life, the ones she'd seen from the break room of Hangar 7, the ones she'd counted from the fence line on weekend mornings, the ones she had tracked by sound from her bedroom window in the dark, identifying them by the specific pitch of the engine, a skill her mother had taught her the way other parents teach their children to identify bird calls. All those planes, carrying all those people who did not know the names of engine components, who could not hear the difference between a healthy turbine and a stressed one, who did not know how to read a maintenance log or cross-reference a serial number or walk 12 blocks at 6 in the morning on no sleep and no breakfast to stand on a restricted tarmac and say, with a 9-year-old's quiet and complete certainty, the one word that needed to be said. They did not need to know. That was not their job. That was not what they had been given. Maya had been given something different. She had been given years of Saturday mornings in the hangar. She had been given a mother who believed that complicated things could be explained simply to someone who truly wanted to understand. She had been given a love for machines that was also a love for precision, for the satisfaction of the thing that fits correctly, that functions as it should, that does what it was made to do. She had been given knowledge, and she had learned on a Tuesday in July, on a hot tarmac with jet fuel in the air and 183 people behind the glass, what knowledge was for. Not to hold, not to keep, not to carry around until someone with the right credentials asked for it in the right official setting. To use, right now, with the tools you have, with the voice you have. Even when the voice is small and the crowd is large, and the people in authority are walking past you toward the stairs, and you are standing on a tarmac where you absolutely should not be, in a dirty yellow hoodie and shoes that were once white, with a backpack meant for school and a mother's report memorized in your mind, and nothing, except the absolute certainty that you are right, and that being right is not enough unless you say so. Stop. 2 letters, 1 syllable, the smallest possible unit of intervention. Enough. It was almost always enough, she would come to understand, in the years that followed. You did not need volume. You did not need credentials. You did not need to be the right age or the right size or standing in the right place. You needed to know what you knew, and you needed to say it, and you needed to not stop saying it until someone listened. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, someone did. Maya Osei was almost 10 years old. She had 12 blocks to walk home. She picked up her backpack and walked. In the months following the investigation, the aviation community discussed what had happened at Gate 14 in a specific and technical way, as a case study in the failure of internal reporting systems, as an example of what happens when institutional authority is allowed to override technical evidence without independent review, as a cautionary illustration of what the industry calls normalization of deviance, the gradual process by which organizations begin to accept small deviations from safety standards as normal, until the deviations accumulate into something that is no longer small. These were important discussions. They led to policy changes, to revised protocols, to a federal mandate requiring independent technical review of all dismissed maintenance discrepancy reports above a certain classification level. They led to real changes that would protect real people in the future. Invisible changes that would never make the news, because the best safety outcomes are the ones where nothing happens, where the plane takes off and lands, and the passengers collect their bags and walk to their cars and go home and think nothing of it. But none of that is what Maya remembered in the years that followed when she thought about that day. She remembered the heat of the tarmac coming up through the soles of her sneakers. She remembered the smell, jet fuel and sun-hot concrete, and something faintly metallic from the engines. She remembered the way the captain had stopped walking. Not dramatically, not with a gasp or a stumble, just stopped. The way you stop when something reaches you before you've processed it, when the body responds before the mind catches up. She remembered the specific feeling of his question. What do you see, Maya? Not, what are you doing here? Not, you shouldn't be here. Not, who let you onto the tarmac? He had looked at her, really looked at her, the way adults rarely look at children, with the focused and complete attention that says, I am listening as if what you say matters because it might. And he had asked her what she saw. She had told him everything her mother had shown her, everything she had read in the report, everything she had memorized and cross-referenced and carried in her mind through 12 blocks of early morning streets. She had told him in the language her mother had taught her, not simplified, not softened, the real language, the technical language, the language that said, I'm not guessing, I'm not hoping, I'm telling you what I know. And he had listened. That was the miracle of it, she would think later, not the finding. The finding was physics, was inevitable, would have happened eventually with or without her. The miracle was the listening, that a 31-year veteran captain had set down his luggage case on a hot tarmac and bent his attention toward a 9-year-old girl, and treated what she said as worth understanding. Not everyone would have done that. She knew it. She had known it that morning, walking to the airport in the cold, early light, which was why her hands had been shaking and why she had practiced the word stop, only stop, because stop was the one word she needed him to hear before he made up his mind. She had known that she would have about 3 seconds before the authority of the situation, the uniform, the badge, the restricted zone, the whole system of who was supposed to be where and doing what, would make it very easy for him to simply walk past her. He had not walked past her. She thought about that sometimes. About the other version of the morning, the version where he looked at her and kept walking, the version where the maintenance inspection did not happen that day, the version where 183 people filed onto the plane and the door closed and the aircraft taxied to the runway. She did not let herself think about that version for very long. She was not built for that kind of thinking, for dwelling in the negative space of what might have been. Her mother had not raised her that way. Her mother had raised her to look at what is, not at what isn't, to work from where you are rather than from where you are afraid of being, but she understood the weight of it. She understood that the difference between the two versions of that Tuesday was a conversation. One conversation on one tarmac, on one afternoon. A man who stopped and listened, and a girl who did not let herself be quiet when being quiet was easier. Diane Osei's new position came with certain responsibilities that her previous role had not. One of them, which she had proposed herself and which the airline had accepted as part of the structural changes following the investigation, was a quarterly review session with the full maintenance crew. Not a supervisory session, but a technical exchange, the kind of horizontal conversation that institutions often resist because it requires authority to sit in the same room as expertise and acknowledge that they are not the same thing. She ran these sessions on Friday afternoons in the large conference room of Hangar 7 that smelled of coffee and dry erase markers. She brought donuts because she had once been a person who came to hangar break rooms from the outside and eaten vending machine crackers, and she understood that the gesture of bringing food says, I know you are a person who gets hungry, and I am acknowledging that. At the first session, 2 months into the new role, she had been introducing herself, which felt strange after years of being known in this building, and someone had asked her, a young mechanic in the back row, newly hired, who did not know the whole story and was asking with genuine rather than performative curiosity, what made you file the report when you knew it would be contested? Diane had been quiet for a moment. She had thought about the question the way you think about questions that seem simple but aren't. I had a daughter to go home to, she said finally. And every plane I signed off on was a plane that someone else's daughter was going to get on. That's not a philosophy, that's just arithmetic. The room was quiet for a moment, then someone nodded, and then someone else. That was the other thing Maya had been given, the thing that was harder to name than the technical knowledge, harder to teach, harder to transmit from one person to another because it was not a fact or a skill, but a way of understanding what things are for. An understanding that knowledge has weight only when it is used, that the report filed is worth more than the report written and kept, that the word spoken into difficult silence is worth more than the word thought and swallowed. Her mother had lived this, had filed the report even when she knew it would cost her, had written the documentation on evenings when she was tired, had cross-referenced the serial numbers with the care of someone who understood that careful work is respectful work, respectful of the people whose lives would depend on whether she was right. Maya had watched all of this. She had absorbed it. She had been watching her whole life, and on a Tuesday in July, standing on a tarmac in the full heat of the afternoon sun, she had understood that watching was not the same as acting, that knowing was not the same as saying, and that the distance between them was exactly one word long. Stop, she had said it. Everything else had followed. The morning she started her first formal aviation training class, she was 16, the minimum age, a Friday in September with the particular smell of autumn beginning. She sat in the second row of a classroom at the Regional Aviation Academy and looked around at the other students. There were 12 of them. Some looked nervous, some looked bored. One boy in the back was already taking notes on a laptop, and something about the focused determination of his typing made her smile without knowing why. The instructor came in. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with grey-streaked hair and the unhurried, very precise movements of someone who has been doing one thing for a long time and has stopped needing to perform it. She set her materials on the desk, looked at the class, and said without preamble, "Why is maintenance the most important part of aviation?" Silence, the kind of silence that fills a classroom when no one is sure if the question is rhetorical. Maya raised her hand. The instructor looked at her. "Yes?" "Because the plane doesn't know it's broken," Maya said. "Only the people do, and whether it stays broken depends entirely on whether those people say so." The instructor looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. The expression of a teacher who has asked a question many times and is not often surprised by the answer. "Your name?" she said. "Maya Osei." The instructor wrote it down. Then she looked back at the class and she began. Outside the window of the classroom, on the tarmac of the Academy's small regional airfield, a light aircraft was running through pre-flight checks. The sound of the engine came through the glass, low and steady, the sound of a machine that is ready, that has been looked at carefully by people who understood what they were looking at, the sound of something trustworthy. Maya heard it and felt something she could not quite name, something that was recognition and gratitude and purpose all at once. Something that was her mother's voice in her memory, explaining what a healthy engine sounds like, and the feel of the tarmac under her sneakers on a summer afternoon, and the weight of a small brown backpack, and the clarity of one word said into difficult air. She picked up her pen. She began.